All right, this is AP Lit, and we're going to discuss the book. Anybody want to be the first? Again, focus on the ending of it, and then connect it to anything else in the book. Remember Wednesday, when we write about this, you're going to have a very general, broad area to work with. So you ought to have in mind what the book means. That's everything we say today, everything I should somehow contribute to what the book means. And so I should be able to read that in the first paragraph of your paper Wednesday, depending on how the question is worded. But remember, that's usually always part of what they're going to ask you is, how does this contribute, whatever they're asking to look at, or me asking you, how does it contribute to the meaning of the work as a whole? Does anybody want to start today? Yes, Willa.
Well, I thought it was interesting that at the very end, Jack was just pretty much, he was saying that he was just completely done with everything, like everybody had died. And on page 580, he says, they all looked alike to me then, and I looked like them, which kind of gave me the sense of that sinful nature. Sinful nature.
Sinful.
He saw that their sins, and he said at that time he kind of looked like them, which kind of reminded me of the sinful nature in the book and how they all look alike in those aspects. And there are certain things that every character did wrong and could do wrong. So that's interesting.
And are you saying there's some redemption there for Jack? It's got to start with recognition.
Yeah.
Think about Dimsdale on the scaffold. All that is confession. I mean, what was he able to do to change? Well, that shows a change. You know, he turned away from that sin, but he sure couldn't fix anything. You know, he and Hester were so. But we'd still say that's redemption. That's an archetypal thing. Redemption. And, you know, that was on the quiz Friday, Thursday. So archetypes. You'll see those in literature going way back. Yes.
I think it's kind of interesting that you could see Willie's end kind of coming because he started to like lose control of everything around him, and like when Tom was paralyzed and he didn't really have control of the situation, he couldn't help him, and then his hospital plan kind of falls through, and just everything in Willie's life started like going downhill, and that's how you could kind of tell that it was almost over.
Is he a tragic hero? You remember tragic heroes like Hamlet and Macbeth? Those people, Oedipus. He recognizes, he knows he caused it. So did he cause it? And clearly, did he recognize that he caused his own downfall? Humpty Dumpty fell, sat on a wall, had a great fall. Does he recognize that do you think he caused his own downfall?
I think he definitely caused it. Like, he seemed to be the source of all of the evil in the book, pretty much. But I don't know if he recognized it as much as he should have.
Okay. Yes, Leon.
Well, my main problem with the ending is that everybody kind of got the ending they deserved where their character was going, except for Jack and Anne, who were probably arguably two of the least least popular characters or least good characters. But like Willie, he wasn't a great guy. He died. Adam was like kind of, I don't know, but you don't really go from like hating a guy to killing him. So it was kind of like he kind of might not have been all right.
What do you mean, all right?
Yeah, like, or maybe he was just like, he had a lot of rage or something that
It doesn't seem really in character with him at all, does it? I agree with you. That's an odd choice. Could have been a dozen different people.
Tom wasn't really a great guy, and he died, or he wasn't like nice to people. He was just kind of self-centered. Lucy, she kind of got like a new start. She could kind of raise the child as she wanted to, instead of having Willie raise Tom as he wanted to. Sugar Boy just kind of, he was all right. He was just kind of there. And then Tiny Duffy kind of was like Willie 2.0. He was kind of like the lesser version of Willie, and he kind of rose to fill in the power that Willie had. So it kind of was the next progression.
And yet, what does Jack, in a sense, threaten him with? there at the end, you know, he's got this, the goods on Tiny, he's got the evidence. So he's gonna make Tiny sweat, at the very least, and, you know, he's really he doesn't have a lot of power, he has nothing else really going for him. Very good, that's a good summary of what's going on in the book, yeah, Kinsley.
I just thought it was interesting how when Tom got hurt from the game, Willie just didn't really care, just kept watching the game.
Okay, I just have a question for you, have you ever gotten hurt in a game? How did your dad and your mom respond differently maybe to that?
They would like run on the court.
Both of them?
Probably.
It seems like most dads might respond a little bit like Willie. Oh, he's all right. You know, he'll yeah, he's a tough kid. You know, I can picture that. I mean, I can picture now being a girl, not that should be, but, you know, maybe I never had a girl, and, you know, maybe you're a little bit more protective of your daughter, but I can think of some, you know, dads saying, oh, you'll be all right, just shake it off, rub some dirt in it. Did you ever hear that? I mean, shake it off, you know, you got a bullet wound in your chest, shake it off, it'll be okay. That's a dad, so I think he was really worried, right? He just didn't show it at first, he just showed it, I think, like a man. He's not a very good, really, he's not a very good father, anyway. I see your point, yeah.
Tone and Jack was trying to finish his cast master paper, or like he was saying that he went back to it and was working on it, because I think that shows how after all of this, like he went through the kind of great twitch phase where he thought everything was just random and like he didn't, like randomness was responsible for everything, and then when he goes back to working on cast master, and that's just showing his personal growth, like where he's now willing to take responsibility for things.
So there's some redemption there. He definitely is trying to become like Cass, you know, learn the lesson of Cass, who messed up but tried to fix it. He didn't, but he tried. Yes, please.
I think going off what Renee said, I think it's really interesting how Jack has like developed as a character because he's finishing what like his research and all of that, he's finishing something, which I think kind of shows how much he's changed, because throughout the book, you know, he's like, he quits law school, he quits, what was the history thing? He quits the taskmaster thing originally.
His
He quits
doctorate,
his
which was his
marriage,
doctorate.
He quits his job, he just keeps quitting things when they don't work out for him, and he's not willing to like put in the work to finish them and to solve his issues. So at the end, when he's going back and like taking responsibility for stuff, he's also finishing something, which I think is.
Good, that's a part of the taking the responsibility, finish what you started, yes.
Liam kind of touched on this earlier, but I just thought it was really fitting, how Lucy got Tom's baby in the end. And I just think that's a, kind of, I guess, redemption, like Liam was saying, how it's like her fresh start. But I also think it shows that she's really like brave, because I think that would be really hard to raise your son's child right after he passed away.
And she's not young.
Yeah, and so I
Lucy.
just think that, like, with a constant reminder of Tom, like, being around, just shows that she's, I guess, just brave enough to want to raise him anyways as her own.
I was trying to think of an analogy to her. I think I can say you won't be familiar with any of these, but the woman maybe are often shown this way is silent sufferer. You know, they don't quit, they don't give up, they work through it. I mean, she is to me, she's a very admirable character. But I didn't think about it. I guess Liam did bring it up about she gets to do what she couldn't do with her own son. I thought that was a good point. Yeah.
Oh, I like how Jack, when he finds out that Duffy, I guess, indirectly caused the death of Willie, he just kind of lets it go a bit, kind of like getting away from like the politics and everything, like the, I guess, like getting back at each other kind of deal. And then, but he still like stays at Verdon's Landing with like all the memories of everything.
Yeah.
In the judge's house too, so it's kind of like weird why he still is tied down to that area. But he also gives up on his politics and stuff.
Except he does threaten Tiny. I'm trying to remember the details of that. He does have this over with Tiny, and he doesn't pull the trigger. You know, he doesn't use it yet. but I don't know what he expects. I can't remember, what does he expect Tiny to do now? Tiny is sort of hamstrung in a way. He's gonna be limited in what he can do as governor. He's gotta run again. It looks like he's gonna have some really decent people running against him. Yeah, and Sarah?
I liked how at the part where Adam and Willie were both shot, that Jack ran to Adam instead of Willie.
Huh.
And it shows that, like, his loyalty to Adam after everything, but also, like, it's kind of like his political side kind of dying off a little bit and him going to another side, which I liked.
And somebody pointed out during last period, that he doesn't really blame Adam. I mean, he doesn't, he points the finger elsewhere, but he's pretty much to blame, but it only gives him a pass. Colleen?
Well, I just like at the end of the book how Jack's like completely given up on politics, really. I feel like it was such like a bad thing for him. He was always struggling morally with it, like, I'm working for Willie, I'm getting all this, not like, he never like says why he was so loyal to Willie, but even when Willie's dead, he gets offered by Tiny Duffy a new job and to get a raise, and he's like, no, I'm done with all of this. I just respected that.
And who's the guy that he might help, who's gonna run? I can't even remember his name. I just heard it last week. You remember, at the very end, he says he might get back into it if it's the right guy, and it's the guy that used to be, what's his name? He used to be Willie's secretary of, attorney general, and he sounds like a good guy, so at least that also shows redemption, that he's changed. He's now gonna work for somebody that's really a good guy, yeah. Look.
Well, I just kind of find it interesting that throughout the entire book, I feel like some of us have thought that Willie was a bad person, but at the very end of the book, when Jack visits Lucy, she says, "Oh, I know he made mistakes, but he was a great man."
Yeah.
And she kept saying that, and I think that brings that to the focus of the reader and just being like, oh, we realize that everybody makes mistakes, and that also has to come into that sinful nature aspect, that everybody makes mistakes, and you don't have to call them a bad person
Right.
based on maybe the many mistakes that they make.
Well, you made me think of, say, something like Thomas Jefferson. We found out he was a slave owner or had a relationship with one of his slaves. Does that make him less of a president? What about Jimmy Carter, who I voted for twice? You don't know anything about Jimmy Carter. He's a born-again Christian. But, I wouldn't have voted for him again because of his politics, because of what his party believed in. But he was probably a much better person than Thomas Jefferson. Yet, was Thomas Jefferson not now a great man because of what he did? I mean, we're not looking at this from God's point of view, but what about as a president? Does that distract from the fact Willie's corrupt, but did he do good? Is he a great man? What is greatness? It makes you define those terms. What does it mean to be a great president or a great man? All those things I think are questionable now. Yes.
Well, one thing that's not really touched on very much in this book is religion. Like, that's not
Yeah.
really a main aspect of this book.
No.
But even from like a Christian point of view, you could kind of interpret that Willie's death was sort of divine intervention. Not divine intervention, but it was God's purpose, because he got shot, but he didn't die from getting shot. He died from the infection that he got later after he had gotten shot. So it was like he was surviving, but God was kind of like, no, it's your time to go, and you kind of served what you were supposed to do. So it could almost be interpreted as that.
And I can't even remember his name. Huey Long, I had to look at it. I can't believe I could see it. Huey Long could have been a very dangerous president. He was killed just like Willie, because Willie's based on him. And he was, some people call him America's first dictator, because of the way he did business. And so, when you said God's intervention, maybe about John F. Kennedy. I mean, he's like a pretty, well, he wasn't a particularly moral man either, but, you wonder how God intervenes, and ultimately he does. He's everything that happens, he had his hands in it, that is God. Yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting what Willa just said, because after all that Willie had done and participated in, the bad politics and manipulation, it said that crowds and crowds of people showed up at his funeral, showed up just because of his prominence in politics and just this huge role that he played, or if they actually showed up because they thought that he was a good person. So I thought
And
that was interesting.
I think part of that is they really saw Willie help them. That's what makes me feel better about Willie, that these people were really helped by Willie. I thought it was interesting when they impeached him. They didn't convict him, but they impeached him. All these regular people were there, and Jack makes a point of saying the fact that he had all these affairs, they almost accepted that as that goes with the job. He's still a good, and I'm not sure I believe that, but it's like they almost said that's okay for him because he's different from us. And we couldn't get away with it, but Willie is a bigger man, and so he's capable of all these things. So he has a past, in other words. Yeah. Nice.
One thing I thought was interesting was it seemed like the whole book they were sort of setting Tom up as he's the exact same as Willie. He just sort of is in charge of everything he does. He's the big man on campus type thing. And so it seems like it was really foreshadowing for Willie about to lose everything. When Tom gets his back broken, he can't walk anymore, and so it's like he's paralyzed and things start going south. And it's sort of like what Sarah said a minute ago. And then he catches pneumonia, and it's just like he can't. One thing after the other starts hitting him, and you're just sort of like, okay, so he's been just a mini Willie the whole time. So if this is starting to happen to him, something's about to happen to Willie right before it does. So it's very good foreshadowing.
Let me just suggest one thing different, I think, between Willie actually, at least before his first running of, for governor, when he changed, he had to work to become a lawyer. He actually put in the effort. He actually had. There's a good side of Willie where he worked. He was moral. He was good to his wife. Tom doesn't seem like he's been spoiled from day one. He's worse than the father, although like the father in all the bad ways. I don't know if he was like him in any of the good ways. Kieran, yeah.
Something that I thought was kind of interesting was kind of like what Leo said earlier about how it was Adam who pulled the trigger. Like it could have been any of the other
Yeah.
characters. Like Sadie hated Willie's guts.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of other people that Willie had ticked off
Sure.
from his corruption and stuff, but it was Adam who was supposed to be like the righteous person who was going to
Yeah.
run the hospital right and not take any corruption. But he was the one who snapped and finally ended Willie. And I think in the book Jack talked about how Willie and Adam were kind of opposites, and they were bound to like destroy each other because they were like trying to become the other or something like that. So it was kind of interesting how just the fact that it was Adam who actually shot him.
And like I said earlier, it seemed like an odd choice, actually. It seems out of character for Adam to be the one. It was almost like this could be a mystery. They had 6 or 7 people that could have been the murderer. They all had motives, all had opportunities. And you threw out the mystery, you're trying to figure out which one actually did it. And Adam would be the last one I would have expected. It almost seems like not a believable choice, because how can you go from being a doctor this far? It just seems like way too far. Yeah.
I found it interesting that Sadie has kind of been this mischievous character who's causing chaos a little bit in the book. And then when everybody's dead, she kind of feels like she has no purpose. She just kind of runs away
Yeah.
from everything. And she's just kind of like, I'm out. See ya. I have no purpose here.
And Jack has a lot of sympathy for her. I do too.
And
Although
that
she is
sways
guilty.
Jack's character even more, that he has sympathy for someone who is causing that chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Avery.
I found it interesting the contrast between Jack as like a self-proclaimed student of history, and he had like such a big history of like not having a good relationship with his mom. He never really knew who his dad was up until the end, versus Willie, who didn't really know his history. He didn't know his parents, and he never really had like a formal education. And then at the end of the book, Jack said the truth brought his past back to him, like when his mom admitted to being in love with the judge always, and he felt sort of redeemed, whereas Willie was kind of destroyed by the truth, because when Adam found out about his affair, that led to him being killed.
Who did you say was destroyed by the truth?
Willie.
Willie. That's a good point. You're the only one who's mentioned the mother in all this, his mother, how she, did say she loved him, and that redeemed her in Jack's eyes. Maggie. And I think, that was an excuse, the Great Twitch. Were you gonna talk about that?
Yeah, I was just gonna talk about how I feel like when he came up with the Great Twitch, he was so desperate for something to like sort of absolve him. Not like it was like he knew what he was doing might not be like looked on as like a great thing in the future, but I think he needed an explanation for himself. But by the end of the book, he can like forget that belief because he's grown with what happened at the end of the book. Because I think the entire book, he sort of stagnated, but by the end, he sort of starts growing again, which I think it's like, because the book is about Jack, it's about his growth, and while like Willie and all these other characters have like their moments and they, like they're interesting to read. Jack, like Jack is the one that grew the most through the book, because he's one of the only people who lived, but I think the Great Twitch was sort of his mind giving him an excuse to live the way he wanted to.
You don't have to answer this before we go. Think about, have you ever had a situation that you put off? In other words, you were avoiding responsibility for something, and have you ever had an experience where you, it just came back to bite you eventually, you know, that you had to eventually do what you always were trying to avoid doing? At some point, you just ran out of real estate. You couldn't run anymore. You don't have to share it. I'd be interested to hear it, but that's sort of Jack. You know, he put it off, Great Twitch, big sleep, whatever you call it. Finally, there was no way out like Dimsdale but to go back to the beginning and fess up. You know, he had to deal with that, just like the judge in House Seven Gables. That whole business, same thing. Archetypical thing, if you think about it. It's like an archetype. This thing, we see it over and over again. And then,
I thought it was funny that, like, after Jack has this revelation about the Great Twitch, where he's like, that's the causelessness of life, let me go watch on the bottomy. Like, it was just so random.
you know what that makes me want to do is think about what is the connection between those things, because we know the author has placed those scenes, juxtaposed them close to each other for a reason. I mean, to me, the Great Twitch is like a lobotomy. A lobotomy, your brain gets, you get rewired somehow. And it's not, do they even do those anymore? I mean, I hope not. That sounded awful. But it's like, that's not the way, a pill or surgery cannot fix everything. We can't take a pill for it. We can't get it removed surgically. Sometimes we just got to face it and live with it. Yes.
I just noticed how Sadie was always claiming that she like made Willie, and then in the end she was the one who ended him.
Yeah.
So I thought, or it just kind of made me wonder if maybe she felt like she needed to take responsibility for like the monster she made, or like if, like I don't know, if it was just her own like ending up hating him, or
And
if she felt bad about
don't you
it.
think she wanted to get rid of him because she felt like she made him and he never appreciated it? But you're right. And she does cooperate with Jack, so maybe that's her way of, facing that responsibility. Eli.
I think the point you made earlier about him having to like go back to the beginning and like absolve himself or like restart basically, I think it's interesting how by the end of the book he sort of is given a second chance at like how he came to be the person he was, because he's back with Anne. He is working on the book about Cass Matherin again. He like sort of fixed his relationship with his mom. He found out who his real dad was, and he sort of let that part of.
And he took responsibility for it.
So like, I think
Oh,
in
Dad.
a lot of ways he's sort of able to like start his life again, but with all the knowledge he had from the mistakes he made with Willie.
That's why I like literature, because you're safe in reading about other people's problems and how they deal with them, and you might be able to use some of that in your life. Yeah.
Going back to Jack's mom, he said that he had learned the truth from her, and that he had learned who she actually was, and that he could accept the past. And so I just found it was interesting that all this time he was just living in the present and what was happening, but with his mom he could finally accept the past, and she had just like she had accepted it.
Do you think, the fact that the judge was his father, does that raise him in your estimation or lower him? Did he handle that, well, having an affair is no excuse for that, but how he handled the post-affair, did he handle it right? I feel like Ellis Burden, his fake dad, the one he thought he was his dad, but was the father. Now we know why he left, right? Because of the affair. Seemed like he did the noble thing. You don't have to, but instead he didn't kill anybody. He just left because he had too much pride to live with this woman who committed adultery, and the judge never admits it, never raises his son. That, to me, that makes him look worse than better, although I guess you could make the case. And a lot of people don't like the ending because it's too happy. Did you say that earlier? Somewhere today, it's too happy. It's not in keeping with, you just mentioned, everybody gets what they deserve, except Jack and Ann. Somebody said that in here. I don't know, yeah. And so they don't like the ending because of that. So they should have to pay more, because Jack did pay. You know, he lost his best friend. He lost 3 fathers, right? If you think about it, Willie was a father figure. The judge was his father, and the other guy, he thought was his father. So he lost 3 fathers in the deal. He paid for it. And Ann lost her lover and her brother and her father. You know, her father turned out not to be who she thought it was. So they, not like they didn't pay. Any last words? Good job with that. You know, on Wednesday, you have a chance to write it, and it's really more about the writing than anything else. That's really what we're always trying to test you on. So we're not quite ready. I think they have 4 minutes.